Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we are with the one and only, the professional cynic. I'm just an amateur. I'm a guy who's waiting to look up. What the hell have I done here? All right, I'm having a rough time here. I got too many things running at the same time. We're talking to Mark Sleboda. Let's go. All right, as you can see, this is really genuine alternative media. I don't have somebody that's running cameras and things for me, so I'm all over the place trying to figure out how to get this thing going. But there was an old cigarette advertisement in the 70s that said, "What do you want, good grammar or good taste?" So right now we're going to go with good taste. Mark Sleboda, welcome back to my humble YouTube channel, and dysfunctional, I might add.
Garland, thanks for having me. And it's a good thing I'm not going to be quizzed on grammar.
Oh, good. All right, let's get rocking.
My Russian grammar is abysmal.
I only know a few words in Russian. I don't even know what they mean, so that ain't gonna work. I can give you the privyet and cockstealers and spasiba, and that's I can high and buy and hey, order a little bit of food or something at best, and that's the important stuff. I need to learn how to say, I don't care what's on the menu as long as it's Georgian. That's what I need when I go to a restaurant. I don't care what it is, Georgian. Put it on my plate. We're good. All right, Mark, let's get going. The story is the story. We know what everyone is watching, waiting to hear what Mark's going to say on the terrorist, another Ukrainian terrorist attack. This time, a general who was involved in the investigation of the bio research labs in Ukraine, and there was a terrorist attack. He died, and most people, let's face it, most sensible people realize that the Ukrainians have said they're behind it, but the U.S. military, we knew nothing about it. Okay, Mark, your thoughts?
Yeah. Okay. So this is another in a truly enormous mountain of Kiev regime assassinations, right? In Russia, for instance, just last week, there was another assassination. This one didn't get as big a headlines. The head designer, probably Russia's, maybe their top missile expert, Mikhail Shatsky, was gunned down in a park in Moscow. And right away, we had the very same thing where Ukrainian anonymous officials from Ukrainian intelligence immediately claimed credit, right? This coy that the government doesn't officially admit it, but they brag about it, through the press with the anonymous officials anyway. There have been a whole string of Russian generals, officers, right, military, over the last few years. We've even seen civilians. The Russian journalist and philosopher Daria Dugina, a personal friend of mine, was killed in a car bombing that may or may not have targeted her or her father. The war correspondent and blogger Vladen Tatarsky, who himself he identified now as Russian, obviously, but he's from Eastern Ukraine, right? He was killed in a bomb hidden inside a statue in St. Petersburg. And there have been a few other Russian officers and officials killed in the last couple of years. But really, when you go to the former Eastern Ukraine, right, when you go to the Donbass, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye, there have been hundreds of assassinations, right? Officials, activists, leaders, anyone who said anything bad about Bandera or his parentage, right? There have been hundreds of them, and their preferred method is bombings, but there have been enough shootings as well. It happens to this day, right? It continues. This is so frequent that it is barely newsworthy even in Russia, and never really reaches the Western press. On the rare occasions these people were referred to as collaborators, and the general view is they deserved to be killed. And that's the view that the Western press has taken whenever it has bothered to express an opinion on this. And this is, gets to the characteristic of the regime in Kiev. They kill, they murder anyone who doesn't share their conception of a Banderite Ukraine geopolitically aligned with the United States, and with a forced policy of Ukrainization, that is not only an issue for the Russian ethnic peoples of Ukraine, right, but other minorities as well, and all of those who simply, Ukrainians, that generally have the Ukrainian population that viewed Russia as brother people. Why are you trying to ban the Russian language? Why are you trying to ban the Ukrainian Orthodox Church? Why are you banning all the political parties that represent East Ukraine and all the leftist parties in the country? Why are you shutting down all of the media that has a view outside that of the Maidan Putsch consensus, right? That is, the people who have been killed in the hundreds, right, in such targeted assassinations. And the New York Times bragged last year, right, that Ukrainian intelligence, the U.S. intelligence, came in and they rebuilt Ukrainian intelligence, both the SBU, right, the Primary Intelligence Directorate, and the GUR, the Military Intelligence Directorate, the one led by Kyrylo I like the dark Budanov. And we rebuilt them from the ground up in our own image. Well, that own image has been involved to a very large degree in hundreds of assassinations of Ukrainian or former Ukrainian people who were viewed as collaborators or traitors. This is what the future this regime would have for the people of East Ukraine if Russia just, disappeared, packed up and went away and left these people to the tender mercies of the Kiev regime. So long history here. And when the U.S. says we knew nothing, we saw nothing, we don't really have an opinion, take it to Ukraine, don't believe it for a second, right? They know everything that happens inside the Ukrainian intelligence agencies because they rebuilt them from the ground up. You think they just stepped back then? Come on. There are entire floors of the SBU building in Kiev that are dedicated to U.S. and British intelligence. So no one in the Kremlin certainly believes that. And this latest, so it was Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, right? He was the head of the Russian forces for the defense against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear attacks, right? CBRN. And he's not directly involved in the special military operation, right? He's not planning military operations. He's not leading troops on the ground. The work he has done is primarily to document the Kiev regime's use of chemical weapons, which he has done very thoroughly. Now, it has to be said that the Kiev regime troops have used chemical weapons, but but it has been up until this point relatively small scale, right? Maybe even on a local level, not systemic, not mass use, more like in isolated locales and incidences, like they're trying to figure out what works. That would be, an idea. And chemical weapons are notoriously garbage weapons, to be perfectly honest. They have a tendency of blowback. They're not very good on the battlefield. And most of what has been used has been more what would be considered irritants, knockout gas, things like that. Things that might be used in some countries by police forces, right? Like, say, the United States. But their use in war is prohibited by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW. Now, so he's documented these incidences quite extensively. He's also, of course, done a very extensive documentation and reporting on these bio research facilities that the Pentagon has paid for, in Ukraine, right? Directing from the documentation entailed up to biohazard level 3, right? 4 being the absolute top, right? Very serious biological weapons, the use of insects as carriers for weapons, ethnically tailored viruses, all of this sort of thing. And that they tried to deny this, right? Like the Western media, these debunked reports. I'm like, how is it debunked? Because they said it wasn't true. I mean, is that debunking it? There was never any debunking. And then Victoria Nuland came right out in Senate testimony, a couple of years ago, or a year and a half, and said, yeah, we had Pentagon funded bio-research facilities in Ukraine. So there wasn't even any denying it. But obviously, the exposure of these bio-research facilities isn't something they wanted, right? It's funded by the Pentagon, right? It's not funded by the Department of Health and Human Services. It's not the CDC. It's not the World Health Organization. There is no accountability. There's no transparency. It's the Pentagon, right? They're doing this as a weapon. There was never any doubt in anyone with an ounce of, intellectual honesty what was going on there. So he worked very extensively on this. He was also working on several incidences where the Kiev regime was obviously preparing false flags of chemical weapon use, by Russia. That type of false flag would encourage or enable, NATO intervention and the like. That these were the purposes of this. And in fact, just in 24 hours before Krylov was killed, the Kiev regime put out basically a declaration of intent to kill him, saying he was a war criminal because he was, directing Russia's use of chemical weapons. And this is pure projection, right? Russia has had no need. They haven't, it's like Assad using chemical weapons when he was winning the war back in whenever. It's complete projection and nonsense, and is being used in the Western media as a justification for this killing. And the way the killing went, because he's not involved in the SMO, he probably doesn't have as much security as some other top generals, right? He was extremely high ranking. He was a deputy, often reporting to the Russian Security Council itself, right? There was a scooter, right, placed at the entrance to his apartment building. And these damn scooters have become ubiquitous on Moscow's streets, right? Not just kids and teenagers, young people, couriers. They're everywhere. They're a serious annoyance, to be perfectly honest. They've become everywhere. So it's something that might very well have escaped anything but very tight security. And this was placed next to his entrance. And evidently, there was about 300 grams of TNT or TNT equivalent in the handlebar. And as he exited, there was a remote signal, right? There was some type of video feed watching the entrance from a parked car. And then the button was pushed. And they've even got the person on the ground who put it all together. It's an Uzbek citizen, right? Someone who was just paid. He was promised by the Kiev regime's security services $100,000 and a European passport. And for that, he did it. He's been caught. He's confessed, right? He said that, he was following orders, from the beginning from Ukrainian intelligence. They recruited him. And this is one of their standard MOs, is to get local, people who will do anything for money, and not always the sharpest tools in the shed, shall we say, to do this type of terror attacks. And there's a question, right? So Kirillov was a general, right? He was part of the Russian military. He was not directly involved in the special military operation in any way, and he was killed far from the battlefield. So is this a legitimate part of war, or is it, an assassination, or is it a terrorist attack, right? I would call it a targeted assassination using terrorist methods, right? Because using a bombing in a civilian area like this against someone who wasn't directly involved in war, obviously the purpose of it is to instill fear, right, in the Russian people, to make them feel that the Kiev regime can reach out and strike at any time, anyone, anytime it wants. And certainly some of the work that he was documenting, there was probably some degree of, we want to shut him up on what he's been reporting. And also, I think probably a part of it is he might have simply been an easier target for his level of seniority, of his rank, because he wasn't involved in the special military operation. But then again, I've also heard reports by people supposedly close to him that are saying that he actually confessed to them that he believed that he had evidence, that he had received word that he was being hunted. So he may have even known or suspected that he was now declared a target, and they were moving in on him. But the methodology involved, right? That this bombing it's considered something that is against the norms of war, right? It is, if you want to talk to Geneva Conventions, yes, the reason why the Kiev regime hasn't officially proclaimed this and all the other assassinations they've done, because there are legal complications and implications, right? But on the other hand, let's be perfectly honest, the Geneva Conventions, you can't fight a war without breaking the Geneva Conventions. You can simply talk about the degree to which they are broken. And I would argue that Russia hasn't resorted to assassinations and targeted killings. They haven't gone after the Kiev regime's political or military leadership at all. And that's actually a bit of a contention and controversy in Russia, right? They want the Ukrainian political and military leadership hit back. Russia has been trying to obey as much as is possible the rules and the norms of war. They've been trying to fight an honorable war, a good war, right? And part of the reason for that is simply it's Russian military culture. Another part of the reason for that is diplomatic, right? Russia has, you could certainly make the case that the rest of the world outside of the West that has refused to participate in the West's existential economic war of sanctions is effectively siding with Russia. That's certainly the argument that the West makes, right? You're either with us or against us. And it is their refusal to accept the dictates from the West about who they can and can't trade with that has, to a very large extent, is what has enabled the Russian economy to not only stay stable despite this unprecedented economic war on the country by the West, but actually to grow. The Russian economy is still growing, right? The sanctions have there's backlash. The blowback from them has affected Europe far more than it has Russia. And that's why Russia wants to keep the rest of the world on their side by showing, look, what we're doing here, it's not like what Israel has been doing in Palestine, right? With the genocidal level of civilian casualties, when you're killing far more civilians, right, than you are Hamas, right, and leveling the cities purposefully to the ground, right? Not taking firing positions, just bombing every building to the ground, right? Also, you want to talk about what the U.S. did in their invasions of Iraq, their occupation of Syria and the like. And Russia has made the argument, look, we're trying our best in very bad conditions to do this above board. So they haven't resorted to this type of tax. But the Kiev regime, it's the norm. And the Western press just looks the other way or applauds it, right? That's the moral point we are now, where the Western press is applauding this to a very high degree. Now, the U.S. isn't going to go that far, because the reason they are not endorsing this is, well, the targeting of political and military leaders leads to a level of total war, right? It's a war of annihilation. And that methodology could as well be used against them as it could be used against their opponents, right? Or the proxies carrying out for them in this case. So there is still, at some level, a recognition that this is a violation of the norms of war, right? You have even heard some British, I've heard several top British experts in the field say, yeah, this was a terrorist attack, but it's totally justified, right? That's the argument they make. But they have admitted that the methodology, the intent, the target, all elevate it from a level that it is not a legitimate act of war. It is more than an assassination, that it is actually a terrorist attack. And certainly, if this was being done to a American general or a British general, you wouldn't hear any other word but terrorist in the Western press, right? But then again, we're talking the same press that is suddenly referring to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Syria as a rebel group, even though the US, the UK, and the UN have all declared it a terrorist organization and that it is Al-Qaeda rebranded. But suddenly it's a rebel group, right? That's, what do you expect from this press? So I think the Russian government, of course, has vowed a response. Medvedev, as usual, the new Zhirinovsky, the Medvedev 2.0, the firebrand patriot, he has talked about the agonies of the Banderite regime. And he's got a point there, right? They're doing this because they're desperate, not because they can't win on the battlefield, because they've got to strike back somehow. They've got to change the focus of the information warfare. You're not taking a look at the Russians seizing Kharkov or the siege of Pokrovsk that has begun, or all the territory they keep losing in their Kursk incursion. Instead, we talk about this, right? And again, they're fighting an information war sometimes more than the real war. So that is certainly part of the intent here. Is it going to change anything on the battlefield? No, which is probably why Russia's response will be lighter than a lot of people want. Right? I'm like all of you out there, a lot of you out there watching this. I have a knee-jerk, visceral response. Hit them back, right? Wipe out everyone in Kiev who ordered this, everyone in the regime, right? The Russian government's not going to do that, right? Not the government of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. He is pragmatic, he is cold-blooded, and he is calculating. And he is not going to respond to provocations like this in any way that would lead to a change in the overall political and geopolitical situation where that they're winning. They don't want to be taken off course from that. So I think what we can expect is we're certainly not going to see any tit for tat assassinations in the Kiev regime of the Kiev regime's political and military leadership. But I think you'll probably see some long range strikes on facilities that are said to be Ukrainian intelligence. Supposedly, the handler, the Uzbek who was hired to do this was out of Dnipropetrovsk. So maybe some facility that is said to be a Kiev regime SBU intelligence facility in Dnipropetrovsk. Like that would be a likely target. But other than that, I don't think you're going to see a big change. I don't think you're suddenly going to see Russia declare the Kiev regime a terrorist regime. They've already proven that hundreds of times over. If Russia wanted to declare them that for legalistic reasons, they already would have done so. So I know that's not satisfying to a lot of people, but it's like that scene in Star Wars, A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie, when they're heading into the Death Star and they're on the comms and the X-Wings and the Y-Wings and they're saying, stay on target. And that's the way the Russian government, with the catastrophe in Syria, assassinations like this. And this is not the end, right? Expect more and more and more of these things as the Kiev regime and its Western patrons get more desperate and panicked as Russia continues to steamroll on the battlefield.
Well, and Mark, one thing about, you'll remember this term, I harken back to my history, is in nautical navigation. And and you'll probably remember from our many discussions on Sputnik, whenever something like this always happens, I use this term: maintain course and speed.
Yep.
Or as what's his name? As Stephen Covey said in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And it's this, and it's exactly what you said. They're losing everything. They have to try to do something to distract you, try to do something to anger you, to infuriate you, to get you to act out of emotion, because the stoic determination of the Lavrovs and the Putins, those types of people, that's like, hey, we're not emotional. This is surgical. We're going to do this. This works. Then we're going to do that. And whatever you do, you're going to do. The other thing I think is this. I'll get you to comment on this. One of the last things you said was, this won't be the last. There's an air of desperation. Again, going up to January 20th, I keep using this term, the race to January 20th, not saying that Donald Trump is going to come in and fix everything. However, the neocons are scared to death that he at least wants to talk. And they know that's a problem for them. And they got a lot at stake because their hands are all dirty, right? The other part is, I believe that what we call them neocons, what these fascists are trying to do is create an environment where you can't talk, or where the Russians react in a way that you can't, or you know what I mean, some overreaction. They're trying anything they can to create an environment to stop a diplomatic discussion that starts talking about, and here's what I think, Mark. let's say there's a diplomatic discussion, and let's say it goes to the news, and let's say they're not getting a deal, but Donald Trump says, well, what about this? And the Russians say, well, what about this with sanctions? And they start talking. The characterization of the Russian leadership, as always, they're madmen, they're crazy. Putin's a crazy person. He can't be dealt with. The Russians are, the old thing. They're savages. That's what they used to use in the colonial days when they wanted to take your gold and oil and stuff. Then they were savages. Now they're just madmen. Here's my point.
They're Hitler.
Right? Yeah, exactly. They're always Hitler, right?
Yeah.
If in fact you're talking to them and you're having an intellectual conversation, whether it's working or not, it destroys the argument that they're madmen and savages, because you can't have a discussion with madmen and savages. So even when any discussion starts, they can't have that because they're not madmen and savages anymore. And that blows the argument that they've been giving the American people to pieces. So they are in desperation, my point is, and I expect them to continue these types of provocations,
sure,
if not turn into volume, leading into January 20th, to try to leave a mess, the worst mess they can, to stop any reasonable and let me add this, and it's getting clear, there are forces in Europe who have had enough of this crap and are scared that the guillotines are going to come out soon, I might add. Anyway, Mark.
Yeah, I think there's probably almost certainly an element to the calculation of targeting such a senior Russian military figure. There's also probably a bit of trying to stoke tensions between the Russian military leadership and the political leadership, right? The generals, right? They if Putin doesn't respond firmly enough, right, strongly enough, there will be increasing feeling that he's not taking the war seriously, or he's keeping our one hand behind our back, our gloves on, these sort of things, and that he's not doing enough to finish this quickly enough. That will be, I'm not so sure if that will be effective, right, when we're talking Russian generals, but I think that's probably a part of the intent. And also, if Russia did resort to killing the Kiev regime's political leadership over this, right? Well, then that would make any type of let's not even talk peace, but any type of de-escalation on the U.S. side, or even the most basics of beginning to actually talk to the other side, right? And remember, in previous conflicts like Vietnam and stuff, talking was a multiple years process while the war went on, right? But they want to stop that, even that from happening, and making Russia react, overreact to this situation is certainly part of the intent.
Just stop you real quick, Mark. Let me throw this in because I think it's an important part of it, and I want to get this part of your response. It wouldn't shock me if the CIA killed Zelensky or some of the Ukrainian leadership themselves just so they could pull a Bucha. Oh, yeah, the Russians clearly did it.
Yeah. No, that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest either. I mean, if that's what it took to manipulate Donald Trump into the position that they need him to make the decisions that they want him to make, they're certainly not above that. There's not really a doubt in my mind about that. Yeah, I mean, I think that a serious part of the calculation is, putting up further obstacles, and Russia's aware of this, which is why, for the moment, they are going to do to all of these types of provocations, whether terrorist attacks and assassinations, or the most recent ATACMS, right? That was 6 ATACMS missiles fired by the U.S. Let's, forego the fig leaf of there was a Ukrainian somewhere nearby while the Biden administration was having its military fire these missiles into Russia. But what was Russia's response to this? After previously they've made statements that they reserve the right to strike U.S. military assets or the U.S. itself. The first such attack, they followed up with the strike with this new powerful hypersonic ballistic missile, the Oreshnik. And what did they do after this last attack? Nothing. Right? I mean, they did something. There was a very large missile and drone attack on the Kiev regime's electrical infrastructure and their military industrial complex. But that attack was going to happen anyway. That was a scheduled attack, right? That had been in preparation for weeks. But the attack itself on Taganrog with these 6 ATACMS missiles was so ineffective, right? They were all shot down or neutralized by electronic warfare. 2 were shot down by Panzers. Russia didn't feel the need for any escalatory response. They took the next missile and drone attack and stopped that. This is our response for that on top of it, right? And that's perfectly clear, right? They were going to make that attack anyway, as part of their, degradation of the Kiev regime's electrical infrastructure for its military-industrial complex. And I think Russia will continue to try this until January 20th. And they don't necessarily believe, right, that Donald Trump is going to bring peace, but he did. Didn't give credit. The first time Trump has spoken out about Russia or the conflict in Ukraine since the election, he condemned the U.S. attacking deep inside Russia with ballistic missiles, right? He said it was stupid. I would have used another word, suicidal, a Gotterdammerung death wish, apocalyptic death wish, or something like that. But, Trump's way of language, stupid. But I think Russia will still be, because of things like this, even if they're not expecting, the end of the conflict or something like this, they will wait until the new administration takes power, and then they will judge it by its actions, right? And if it continues the same policies or escalates to de-escalate or something like that, then they will start responding more forcefully, right? Right now, they know that the Biden administration is trying to provoke them. They know what Biden is trying to do, and they're doing their best not to give Biden or Blinken and Sullivan anyway, what they so obviously want.
Yeah. Well, I see people in the chat. Trump will let you down, blah blah blah. As I told you,
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, but I had an opportunity to sit down with Colonel Wilkerson recently and to discuss it. And one of the things, because that's a discussion that I threw in there. One of the things that he talked about his history about Reagan and different people, and how the fact that they were talking at times saved us from some terrible things just because they were talking, right? And the importance of nuclear powers coming together, putting their diplomats together, you know what I mean? Even if you don't get an answer. And after that discussion with him, it makes enough sense that I'm like, yeah. I mean, when he gave me examples that if you talk, you have a chance. You got a chance. I think survive,
That's really important to bring home, is that all through the Cold War, right? Even the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet Union and the U.S. talked to each other. There were rules of the game. There was respect and there was fear on both sides. That doesn't exist anymore, right? The U.S. has lost all impulse for respect or fear, right? In the unipolar moment, they've lost all of that. They're operating solely on this messianic supremacist ideology of exceptionalism, right? They're not capable of putting themselves in the other country's shoes or trying to understand them. They're not capable of the most basics of diplomacy. And the fact that Russia and the US aren't even talking to each other tells you what a bad situation we're in right now. Even if they can't come up with any common way to end this conflict, right? I don't believe they will. I think Trump's instinct is to try to de-escalate the U.S. One, simply because he doesn't like the Kiev regime, right? He involves them as being, in cahoots with all the domestic political forces that pursued him in his first administration and tried to stop him again. But also he would rather concentrate on other things that he thinks are more important. He thinks that this is a stupid war that the U.S. never should have gotten involved in like it did, and that it should be pursuing other priorities. Well, obviously the blob, the deep state, doesn't concur with him on that, but and they're going to try to manipulate him like they did during the first administration. We'll see what comes out of this, but I think Russia is not going to trust but verify, but they are going to give him a chance before they start responding in kind for all of this lame duck Biden administration's parting shots.
I'll say this, and from the perspective of the Russians or someone even like me who believes in justice. I believe in justice for everyone, right? And
I'm too much of a cynic for that.
Yeah, but I mean, I believe in it. I don't necessarily know that it happens. But my point is this: if you're a poor person who says Russia should get justice out of this, right? That what happened in Ukraine and that this was done as a deliberate provocation and to eventually take down Russia, you got to look at Putin and Lavrov and say, man, when Vladimir Putin came in, Russia was a basket case, and he's been very effective. And look what he's done. It's probably the greatest leader in the history of Russia, in my opinion. Nobody, I mean, you could argue from where they were and what he was dealing with. Unbelievable. They've had some great leaders, but he's up there with the best of them.
They've had some very bad leaders too, right?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Gorbachev, right?
Khrushchev.
Yeah.
What's the guys? No, not Khrushchev. The perestroika, the guy before Gorbachev. Oh no, I'm thinking of Gorbachev. Yeah, that's the one that died recently, and all the Americans celebrated, which should tell you something. But at any rate,
of the Pizza Hut commercials.
Yes, but at any rate, if you look at the success, you may be mad and say, I think they should do this, this, and this. Even with the SMO, the combination of their economic response, their diplomatic response in Africa with China, when you look at what they've done and what they've been able to achieve, their hand is not as strong as a lot of people think it is, but they played a relatively strong hand exceptionally well, right? You got to look at them. And my opinion is, well, I may think they should do this, or respond or blah, blah, blah. But when you look at the success they've had, you got to say, I got to put my hands, you know what I mean? These guys know what the hell they're doing. I may want them to do it otherwise, but their rate of success and their ability to look at the big picture is fantastic. I mean, that's what I got to say. It's incredible. So it's hard for me to criticize somebody. It's like criticizing the coach who just won the Super Bowl. Well, he should have ran more, but they won the Super Bowl. Go ahead.
I would agree with you from the end of 2022. The first year of the war, I think there were catastrophic mistakes made by I assume that this is not a military decision, but to go into Ukraine with just 150,000 troops and count that would lead to a diplomatic solution and everything. I think not or at least hoping that NATO would not respond the way they did. I think that was naive, just like the Minsk Accords, just like the Astana framework with Turkey, right? I don't trust anyone, right?
No,
trust
I'm with you.
I'm intellectually, a child of the X-Files in the 90s. Trust no one, right? And I hope that the Kremlin learns its lesson and there will be no more ceasefires or frozen conflict or fake pieces. If the U.S. in some unbelievable situation will come close enough to Russia's terms for the SMO, which I severely doubt that they'll accept that. But if they did, well, then you take it and you cement it, right? You absolutely, this cannot be something that the next president reverses around, like we've seen multiple times before. I don't even know how you would go about that. I really don't. But if it doesn't, then you see this through to the end, whatever that end is, right? Russia is not concerned with peace. Russia is concerned with victory, even if that's an ugly victory, because ultimately peace there hasn't been peace in Ukraine since 2014. Remember that. There was a civil conflict that began right after the West backed Maidan Putsch. The only way there will be long-term peace in Ukraine is a Russian victory that removes this regime root and branch, whether it's diplomatically, with terms, or militarily from Kiev. I'm sorry. Anything else, any type of half measures, any type of Minsk Accord 3.0 or anything like that would be, well, it would be, if they have to fight this war a few years down the road when NATO is better prepared, well, then that's it. Yeah, and I think Putin understands that that's existential.
I remember hearing Lavrov say, we've got to address the roots of the problem. And I think they're going to go back to their original document that they submitted in December of 2021 and say, we got to talk, that you said you would, you know what I mean? And I mean, that's the wise thing to do. Okay, Trump, we want to talk. I'm glad you said that, because when we gave this document to Blinken and Biden, they said that ain't even a starter. Stoltenberg said, you have no say. We're ready to talk too. Here, review this like that we asked of them, and give us something in writing like we asked them. And then, you know what I mean? It's like, that's what this was all about. So I think that's where we're going. But we ain't got a lot of time left, Mark. Let's get to Europe. Seems like they're having some problems in Europe, and one of them is good old the pirate, he of the Jello spine, Schultz. His government has finally collapsed. And can I ask you this? How would we know? Or as Annalena Baerbock would say, their government has taken a 360-degree turn.
Yeah,
which with the new guy who might come in, may be quite accurate, actually.
All right, so I mean, this traffic light coalition, this weak coalition that has survived as long as it's had, which is almost a miracle, with Schultz's SPD, right, as the nominal lead, even though we all know it was really Annalena Baerbock wearing the breeches in that particular political family, right? And so the Green Party, and then there was this third partner, the yellow partner, the Free Democrats, which are a pro-business liberal party, a small party in Germany. They pulled out of the coalition effectively. The leader of that party was the finance minister, and they had a break, ostensibly, with Schultz and Baerbock over the issue of aid to Ukraine, whether that was real or manufactured, whatever, with an eye on future elections and wanting to separate themselves from Schultz's plummeting approval ratings, whatever. Since that happened, it has just been a slow motion collapse, right? Everyone knew it was going to collapse. Everyone knew that a vote of confidence was coming. Everyone knew that Schultz wouldn't survive it. Everyone knows that will lead to snap elections. And everyone knows that those snap elections, that however, the Alternative for Germany and the Sarah Wagenknecht party on the left, they're going to do better than before, but that still it's the Christian Democratic Union. Most people will make the lesser of two evils choices, and the Christian Democratic Union will have a plurality of the vote. They'll probably have to coalition with probably not Olaf Scholz's SPD. It will now be someone else's SPD, because he'll be quietly retired. But Merz, the leader of the Christian Democratic Union, who will become the next chancellor almost certainly in February after elections are held, he's in favor of providing the Taurus missiles to the Kiev regime in Ukraine.
He's the German Keir Starmer. That's all.
Yeah,
He's Germany's Keir Starmer. Hey,
I would not argue with that. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. Yeah. So we're probably going to see more escalation at the end of this slow motion collapse. But I don't know if you saw it, but there's AI can do some amazing things. There's a video going around of that is an AI supposedly of Schultz after losing the vote of no confidence, right? And he's at a disco party, right? And they've got his face on some old guy doing this kind of shimmy thing. I think I posted it on my Twitter. If not, I'll have to do so. But it was just brilliant. I mean, it just summed up the spineless jellyfish Schultz, just as you described, and made him out to be. I really don't know how that man ever became. I mean, I didn't like Angela Merkel, and I didn't agree with a lot of what she said, but she was a leader, right? She was a leader for Germany.
She had some heart. She had some toughness. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she had a little spine. She wasn't any iron lady, thank God for that. But compared to Schultz, she, again, Merkel was responsible for the Minsk, betrayal, and all of that. But still, simply respect as a leader, you couldn't even respect Schultz. So no sympathy for that one going.
The funniest thing I thought is recently, President Putin apologized for the infamous dog incident. I thought it was that. Let me ask you this: the infamous dog incident, right? Where, for those people who don't know, tell about the infamous dog incident and whether or not you even believe it or you think it's true, Mark.
Okay, so to tell you the truth, I for the longest time actually thought there might be something to it. Like, Putin is ex-FSB, KGB, right? I mean, I certainly believe that they have psychological profiles of everyone they're dealing with, and they're willing to test things, right? I was willing to believe that. But and that's certainly something that Merkel has put out for years. But recently, a photo
or something, doesn't she?
Yeah, a photo of Merkel with a dog that looked almost exactly like Putin's dog has emerged since then, where Angela Merkel is petting it and acting all nice, not this great phobia of dogs that we're told she has. That suddenly made me doubt these things. But I think for me, the best part of that story is that this black, I think it was a Labrador, that Putin has lots of dogs. He's been gifted lots of dogs, and he likes dogs, right? Which makes I'm a dog person, right?
Oh, you gotta love it.
Yeah. So I understand that. But the name of this dog, he received this dog back during the George W. Bush administration, right? And who was the national security advisor of George W. Bush? Do you remember?
No.
Condoleezza Rice?
Yes.
Yes. So Putin's name for this dog, right? A black female, a black B word, right? Was Condi. The dog's name is Condi.
That's what they used to call Condoleezza Rice.
Just saying.
Oh my gosh. So, but it looks like, I mean, to me, I think based on what's happening with Volkswagen, based on what's happening with Bosch, who, what people don't realize about the crash of the German
no, they don't.
car industry is this: there are numerous countries that provide, you know what I mean, things. Continental provides tires, Bosch provides all their electric, blah blah blah, and as they go, the rest of their economy crashes. And I think Schultz might have just saved himself from the guillotine, because when the rest of this shoe drops, boy, Germany's going to go to pieces. Germany is going to go to pieces.
It is a real deindustrialization, not just the automobile industry. Germany's very large chemical industry, Myers, great, their steel manufacturing industry, anything that is energy intensive, right? That survived because of and was competitive because of relatively cheap, reliable piped Russian gas. All those industries, they're either collapsed or they are downsizing, or they're simply moving out of Germany. Many of them are moving to the United States, where energy costs are relatively cheaper.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're done. And let's face it. I mean, the neoliberal business model. I mean, look at Jaguar. You know what I mean? I mean, yes, the energy is the issue, is hurting European countries, but Stellantis, they bring these neoliberals in, and they completely wreck the corporations, give themselves a $40 million, $50 million salary. The corporation falls apart, and after 2 years, and they leave. Mercedes, a friend of mine who's had Mercedes his entire life, he's like, I don't get them anymore. And I'm like, why? He's like, well, they're plastic crap, and they're really ugly and bubbly looking. And oh, by the way, they're not even reliable anymore. So, I mean, that's the other part of it. That what's discussed in the West is the economic part of deindustrialization and the economic part of the crash of a corporate crash, but not the culture of the ruling elite, where they take over a company. And the companies, see, you got to understand, Mark, the companies in the West are no longer manufacturers. They are all financial tools. So when they take over a company, they don't care what it makes or what service it provides. It's how can we get a bunch of loans? How much credit does this company have? We're going to borrow as much as we can. We're going to pay as much as we can out to the board of directors and to the people who have invested. You know what I mean? And so these companies now they're not productive because they're financial tools for them to make as much money. And within 3 or 4 years, 5 years, they're done anyway. But they were very successful for the wealthy people who made money, who made a fortune off of them, and threw them away when it was a dried husk of what used to make cars or whatever it is.
How's that for-profit military-industrial complex in the U.S. and NATO as a whole holding up against the state-owned Russian military-industrial complex that is outproducing them, I don't know, in artillery shells, 3-1, 7-1, this to 1 in missiles, that to 1, right? How is that happening? How is the economy of Nigeria with snow or that gas station out competing, right? Because a war of attrition is ultimately about economics, right? That the economics of production, and Russia's production is strong. So how's that produce on demand neoliberal economic model turning out for the U.S. military industrial complex? I mean, there's still a lot of rich people making money off of it, but they can't keep their little proxy regime in stock and the things it needs for this war. So
if you want to know how it's working out, a member of that's a guy that's considered a member of the ruling elite, a guy who runs United Healthcare, was shot in the back 4 or 5 times.
Oh yeah.
And how did the masses respond? Did the masses respond and go, "Oh, that poor guy, he's got"? That ain't what I saw, Mark.
Yep. I saw a poll, 41% approve. 41% of young people approve of the assassination.
I don't think they'll be able to find a jury to convict the guy. The truth is, I don't see, if you look around, they're going to have to go to the Upper East Side and get a bunch of billionaires, a bunch of people who just like don't even live there. They buy houses to park their, buy multi-million-dollar condos to park their money. They'll find him guilty. If they get any schlumps off the street, guys have been screwed over by these neoliberal corporations, they'll be, come there bearing gifts for him. They'll be there like wearing pictures of him on their t-shirts. And that, I'm telling you, the people around here, they're sharpening up the guillotines, Mark.
And they say that 95% of the judicial process in the United States is jury selection.
Good luck on this one, buddy. All right, Mark Sleboda, where can everybody find you and all your kind works?
At Twitter, X at Mark Sleboda1, and also on Better on Telegram and Substack, The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda.
Good enough. Have you? Oh, before we go, have you heard? So Biden's pardoning lots of criminals. He spoke about pardoning.
Yeah, like his entire administration evidently is getting blanket pardons. Yeah, right.
He's already pardoned himself effectively, but now he had talked about pardoning Liz Cheney, and now it comes back that she was involved. Apparently, is been accused of being involved in witness tampering. Bill Clinton said, yes, they should consider a pardon for Hillary going back to 1992. I mean, you know what? They're like, okay, look, Trump won everything and we're a bunch of criminals. So, Joe, yeah, the jig is up. There's no point us hiding it anymore. Everybody knows we're criminals. We know we're a bunch of criminals. Just blanket pardon, like every Democrat in Congress, probably half the Republicans that work with him too. Everybody, his entire administration, except Tony Blinken. Please don't pardon Tony Blinken, Mark. All righty. Well, thanks a lot. And I will be, back in touch with you. And hopefully next week we can get back together and we'll talk about the good things that happened. We'll only have like 1 minute to talk, so we'll talk about everything. It'll be the shortest show ever. Thanks a lot. Hey, everybody, share this on all your social media platforms. And of course, if you can afford to donate, that's great. If you can't, don't worry about it. Use that money for your family. But just make sure you share this, especially on X, because I ain't on X. I'm out.
Give him the money.
There we go.